So the next part of this unit, we're going to be looking at how the process of photosynthesis works and essentially how are we able to create glucose. So by the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain how plants harness energy from photons and describe thylakoids and pigments. Photosynthesis converts solar energy into chemical energy stored in the bonds of glucose. So essentially, the main goal of this is at the end of it to convert energy from the sun and to create glucose. In the process, it also produces oxygen. If you remember the general equation for cellular respiration, you basically get at the end of cellular respiration, you require glucose and oxygen in order to have this process go. So basically the opposite of what's happening here in photosynthesis. And now keep in mind that in this equation here, there is no ATP that is required that you gain out of it. So at the end of this process here, you're not creating any energy, essentially. You actually need energy in order for this to take place. You need that solar energy in order for the photosynthesis reaction to take place. So essentially, photosynthesis is an endergonic type of reaction because you need energy in order to allow for this process to happen, whereas cellular respiration, you create energy at the end. So it's an exergonic type of reaction that's being happening on that process. So here we have our photosynthesis equation. We have our carbon dioxide, our water, the energy from the sun to create, so sorry, there should be an arrow here going in this direction, to create glucose and oxygen. Okay, so essentially this process here is similar to cellular respiration, and it's a redox reaction. Again, just a reminder that the process of photosynthesis is not to create energy, but to create glucose. That is our end process. There are two major stages in photosynthesis that we're going to be talking about. One is called photophosphorylation, which is also known as light reaction. And then the other process is called a Calvin cycle, which is independent light reaction. So we're going to be looking at both of them. So this is one of the lessons we're going to be talking about, and this will be the other lesson that we're going to be talking about. So photosynthesis is performed by organisms that are autotrophs, which are organisms that manufacture their molecules needed for their own metabolism. So essentially, these types of organisms are able to convert energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of glucose. One of the common misconceptions is that photosynthesis happens in plants and no cellular respiration takes place. This is not true. Plants undergo photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So they're able to create their own glucose, and they're able to break down that glucose in order to use that ATP energy to help with their process. Whereas humans, unfortunately, are unable to create our own glucose. We actually obtain glucose from somewhere else. So humans only perform cellular respiration, whereas plants can do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So this is an image here of a snippet of a leaf and a very close-up image of a leaf that we see here. And some of these terms you should have already learned in grade 11, especially looking at this cross-section of this leaf here. I will talk about it very briefly, but if you don't really know what I'm talking about and you're completely confused, then this is a good point to kind of pause the video and go back to your grade 11 notes or look online, look in the textbook at what these different parts of the leaves are talking about. So we have the top of our leaf up here, or actually the leaf as a whole to start, and the leaf as a whole is going to absorb the solar energy. At the top of our leaf, we have a protective layer that's called the cuticle, and the cuticle's role is to protect the leaf from losing too much water and to protect it from any damage. We next have the upper dermis. So right here are these I guess you could call them like square-ish cells that we have here. We have the upper layer and the lower layer of the epidermis, and it's found just below the cuticle. Then we have the mesophyll, which is, so this is the mesophyll here, and there's two different types of mesophylls. So we have the spongy mesophyll, and then we have the palisade mesophyll cells up here. The palisade mesophyll cells are important for photosynthesis, and they have these, and they're really nice, long and skinny cells, and they're essentially filled with a lot of chlorophyll. And it's important because they are right underneath the upper part of the leaf, so it's able to get and harness that solar energy extremely easily for that part. Down here we have this spongy mesophyll, and the spongy mesophyll does have a little bit of chlorophyll that's found in it, and it does go through the process of photosynthesis, but they don't go through that process as much as the palisade up here. And the reason why is because there's actually more room in between them, so it's spongy, and which it allows for gas and other things to move through this area here. So there's a lot of gas and oxygen, water that's moving through this area here. And this is a good thing because typically right below our spongy mesophyll is where we can find our stomas. And our stomas is the mouth part of the plant, and most of them are found at the bottom of the leaf. And this is where a lot of gas exchange actually takes place. We have carbon dioxide and carbon dioxide and oxygen entering or leaving the cell. We can have water vapor enter leaving the leaf itself, and that happens in the stoma. So this is a good thing because stomas open and close on their own, so that when we don't want certain things to enter or to leave the actual leaf itself, then these stomas can close or they can open when we want that to happen. Then down here is we have our chloroplast. Our chloroplast, and actually looking heavily into the chloroplast, is what we're going to be talking about in these next few lessons. So a few terminologies here is we're going to be looking at the thylakoid. So one of many interconnected stack-like discs that contain molecules that can absorb energy from the sun. Thylakoid plays a huge role in photosynthesis itself. Then we have the granum, which are stacks of thylakoids, the lumen, which is a liquid inside the thylakoid, and the stroma, which is a liquid inside the chloroplast. Be very careful that you don't confuse yourself when you see the terms the stroma and stoma, because they mean two completely different things. So when you're reading our word problems or on a multiple choice, just when you see this word, just look back at it and just ask yourself, is it the stroma or the stoma? Just be very careful. So again, we're looking at the actual chloroplast itself. So this is an entire one chloroplast. So the thylakoid is one of many interconnected sac-like membranous discs within the chloroplast, containing the molecule that absorbs energy from the sun. So one of these disc-like structures is the thylakoid. It kind of looks like a pancake type like shape, and that's the actual thylakoid itself. Stacks of the thylakoid is known as the granum. So this entire structure of all of these stacks of thylakoids together is the granum. Inside of the actual thylakoid itself is where we find the lumen. And then the stroma is a liquid that fills the inside of the actual chloroplast itself. Okay, so to understand photosynthesis, you have to understand how atoms and molecules absorb photons of light. Light is absorbed in these forms of these packs of energies called photos. So the light from the sun is packages from the sun. So it allows for basically, it's just a wave of energy, and different atoms and different molecules have the ability to absorb certain levels of light. So light is absorbed in the forms of packets of energy called photons. An atom or molecule can absorb photons only if they have the amount of energy that is exactly equal to the difference between two energy levels. This means that different pigment molecules can absorb different specific wavelengths of light. As energy increases, wavelength decreases. Okay, so again, it's really important to note that certain atoms can absorb certain wavelengths of light. So one atom might only be able to absorb certain wavelengths that are purple, versus all the different other types of photon of light. So whatever is not absorbed essentially is reflected. So different pigment molecules can absorb specific wavelengths of light, and that is what makes the different leaf colors. So I'm going to show you what I mean by that. So again, really important, I kind of mentioned over here that as energy increases, wavelength decreases. So that's where it's kind of mentioning over here in this slide here. So a shorter wavelength has higher energy, and hopefully you remember this from grade 10 optics. So shorter wavelength means that it's higher energy. A longer wavelength means it has lower energy. Okay, so in this case here, gamma rays have shorter wavelengths and they have higher energy compared to radio waves that have longer wavelengths and they have lower energy. Visible light is in the middle of this spectrum that we see here, and this is the visible light that we're actually able to see. So we're able to see the light range from 380 nanometers anywhere to 750 nanometers. Again, these are the only colors we can see. If you think about it, you can't see any radio waves. So anything that, if you were to use your microwave or anything like that, you're not actually able to see the rays that are coming out of it. Same with your x-rays. If you're going to get an x-ray done, you can't see the waves of light that are coming out of it. So this slide here is kind of explaining three different things that can kind of happen when your electron becomes excited by the energy of a photon coming in. So essentially what happens when solar energy hits a pigment? That photo of light hits the atom of that pigment, and there are different electrons in different energy levels. And we're talking about an energy level, like here is an energy level, and this is an energy level that's over here. So an electron from one energy level moves to another level because it's been hit by a photon of light. It will jump to a different energy level. So what happens is that a photon comes in, it's going to excite this electron, and it's going to cause this electron to jump to another energy level. So one of three different things that's going to happen here. So the same thing in terms of like the photon of energy coming in, exciting this electron, and it going to a new energy level is always going to happen. But then there are three different outcomes of what's going to happen to that electron once it's been excited and once it's moved to a new energy level. So the first thing that can happen is that an electron will go back to its original energy level. It's unstable, and that excess amount of energy will be heat that we can feel. Okay, so basically what happens in the first thing is that that electron that was excited is going to move back to its original energy level, and it's going to lose that energy as heat. The second thing that can happen is that instead of that electron jumping back, it goes directly back to the energy level, but this time the energy that is released actually goes to another electron, and it's going to excite a neighboring pigment molecule. So instead of it that energy being lost as heat, that energy is going to go from this electron to another neighboring electron to excite that one. This is known as like a ripple type of effect. And then the third thing that could happen here is the actual electron doesn't jump back, but it just goes to a different molecule. So what happens is that the electron accepting molecule is going to take that energy, and it's actually going to leave this molecule and move to a different one.